Why do so many new buildings feel colder, flatter, or more interchangeable than the ones people travel across the world to admire? It's a tempting question, and it often produces a very simple answer. Old architecture was beautiful. Modern architecture is ugly. But that's too easy, and it's not really true. Some historic buildings are overbearing, pompous, awkward, or simply unpleasant to live with. Some old streets that look charming in photographs were cramped, dark, dirty, and socially harsh in reality. And some modern buildings are genuinely magnificent. There are modernist and brutalist works, for example, that many people are now reappraising for their spatial power, their material honesty, and their monumentality. So beauty is not tied to one style, one century, or one ideology alone. Still, the question remains. Why do so many contemporary buildings leave people emotionally unmoved? One strong answer is this. Modernity is not inherently ugly, but beauty has been deprioritized inside the systems we use to build, and inside what the public has learned to expect. A useful place to begin is with Vitruvius, the ancient Roman writer who described architecture through three qualities: strength, usefulness, and delight. That trio matters because it suggests that beauty was not some optional extra added at the end, if money happened to be left over. Delight belonged to the definition. A building was not fully successful if it only stood up and functioned. It also had to give pleasure. Today, by contrast, beauty is often treated as decoration, preference, branding, or luxury, something subjective, something negotiable. A building must meet code, fit the budget, satisfy finance, contain the services, manage fire regulations, and survive planning review. Delight, if it appears, can seem like a bonus rather than a requirement. That shift helps explain why older buildings so often feel richer, even when they are not grand. They tend to display a cluster of qualities people repeatedly respond to: proportion, rhythm, material depth, human scale, active ground floors, ornament, ensemble coherence, and some kind of shared formal language. Take proportion. In this argument, proportion is not a mystical formula. It is practical, visual order. Many older buildings clearly read as base, middle, and roof. Their windows relate coherently to one another and to the whole. Openings, wall surfaces, and edges seem to belong to a system. That calm legibility matters. You can understand the building quickly and then continue discovering it slowly. There is some research on visual attractiveness that reportedly points in a similar direction. Not absolute proof and not a final law of taste, but it suggests that people often prefer ordered complexity. Too little information feels monotonous. Too much feels chaotic. Beauty, in this view, often sits somewhere between blankness and overload. Older architecture frequently works in that middle range. It gives the eye enough difference to stay engaged, but enough order to stay calm. A row of windows may repeat, but with reveals, lintels, frames, sills, cornices, joints, shadows, and slight variation. A street can feel coherent without being deadening. Material depth is crucial here. One of the strongest pieces of evidence in favor of older facades is simply how much they do with light. Reveals, projections, profiles, reliefs, joints, and layered surfaces make buildings legible. The facade changes through the day because the sun keeps redrawing it. You do not just see a wall, you read a surface with thickness. Many contemporary facade systems reduce that depth, often for understandable reasons. Cost control, maintenance concerns, speed of construction, and industrialized components all push toward flatter, thinner skins. Those systems may perform well technically, but visually, they can leave buildings looking mute, as if all the interesting decisions were deleted. The same issue appears in human scale. A good older building often communicates at several distances. From far away, it contributes to the skyline or street wall. From the middle distance, its major parts are clear. Up close, you notice handles, frames, textures, thresholds, niches, moldings, stone joints, shop fronts, and little acts of craftsmanship. It speaks at long range, middle range, and close range. By contrast, many large contemporary buildings seem designed mainly as distant images. They may look striking in aerial photographs, renderings, or branding material, but at eye level, they can feel silent. The facade that was meant to read as one pure gesture from across the district may offer almost nothing to the pedestrian standing beside it. That problem becomes even more obvious at the ground floor, where buildings meet public life. Pleasant historic streets often have doors, shops, thresholds, arcades, niches, and frequent points of exchange between inside and outside. Even modest buildings can participate in the street. They acknowledge the passerby. Many modern ground floors, on the other hand, are dominated by technical needs: parking access, ventilation grills, service rooms, blank cores, security setbacks, loading zones, sealed lobbies. The result is a kind of technical plinth. The building still stands on the street, but it no longer really speaks to it. And when enough buildings do that, the whole city becomes harder to enjoy on foot. Ornament sits in a more complicated place. Modernism had valid reasons to reject empty or dishonest decoration. If ornament becomes superficial theater, stuck on without meaning, criticism is justified. But it is also possible that the rejection of bad ornament turned into a much broader impoverishment of surfaces. Ornament, at its best, is not just icing. It can mark transitions, signal scale, frame entries, clarify hierarchy, and carry meaning. It helps the eye understand what matters. At this point, though, source criticism is essential. The past is selective. The historic environments we preserve and celebrate are survivors. Much mediocre, damaged, or ugly fabric disappeared. So when we compare today's average building to yesterday's finest surviving districts, we are not making a fair comparison. We should also remember that historic cities were not simply beautiful stages for urban life. Many were unhealthy and exclusionary places. Even so, the persistence of certain preferences is hard to dismiss. Environmental psychology reportedly indicates fairly robust positive responses to legible order, moderate complexity, natural materials, fractal qualities, human scale, clear transitions, and contextual fit. Again, this does not make taste fully objective or uniform. People differ, cultures differ, individuals learn to love very different things. But the evidence seems to point toward recurring patterns in how human beings respond to built form. So why are those patterns so often absent now? The deeper explanation is less about taste than about system. Building today is shaped by expensive land, risky financing, rising costs, labor expense, volatile supply chains, regulations, building services, fire codes, and investor return logic. Under those conditions, depth, custom details, material variation, ornament, and sometimes even good proportions become harder to justify. Not impossible, but harder. Every reveal is a cost. Every profile is a coordination issue. Every extra material is another risk. Every non-standard element threatens the schedule. And beauty often has no committed patron. Decisions are dispersed across developer, fund, tenant, city, consultants, contractors, and neighborhood pressure. Everyone influences the final result. But no one may be truly responsible for delight. Earlier patrons had plenty of flawed motives, of course, yet they often had stronger incentives to build visibly well, because status, permanence, and civic image were more directly tied to the building itself. Standardization is not the villain in itself. In housing shortages, serial building is necessary. We cannot solve urban demand by handcrafting everything like a palace. The real problem comes when standardization turns into a design excuse, producing placeless buildings detached from local materials, local streets, and local formal languages. Then, efficiency stops being a tool and becomes an alibi. There is also an urban scale issue. Many beloved historic townscapes are beautiful, not because every building is a masterpiece, but because the ensemble works. Street rhythm, shared heights, repeated alignments, compatible materials, and coherent edges create everyday harmony. By contrast, a culture focused on iconic freestanding objects can weaken that background coherence. A city does not only need landmarks, it also needs good, ordinary fabric. And that may be the central lesson. Beauty in architecture is not just about isolated masterpieces or personal taste. It is a public good. It affects behavior, identification, safety, and quality of life. People tend to care more for places that feel cared for. They orient themselves more easily in places that are legible. They often feel calmer, more attached, and more willing to linger where buildings offer richness at a human scale. The encouraging part is that none of this requires a nostalgic return to one historic style. Technology could help reintroduce depth, variation, and character. Digital tools, advanced fabrication, and better systems could make richer buildings possible again. But only if society asks for them. Only if beauty stops being treated as an optional luxury and starts being treated as a normal priority of building well. If you enjoyed this, subscribe, enable notifications, and suggest the next topic in the comments.